Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got another season preview video to discuss. Today we're looking at two Atlantic Division teams in the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Ottawa Senators. We're looking at this past year's season, we're looking at how they did in the off-season, and we're looking ahead to how they can do in this upcoming season. We'll go to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the end of the Hockey Channel. Before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for your support. We're never to help you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below and don't leave a comment down in the comment section below discussing this video. Now, once again, as usual, we got two teams here to talk about in a season preview series. We're looking at the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Ottawa Senators. Now, these are two interesting teams. If you look at the Tampa Bay Lightning, who we're going to start with here, this past season, they finished with a record of 45, 29, and 8 for 98 points. That was good enough for 4th in the Atlantic Division, 6th in the Eastern Conference, and 13th in the NHL. So they had a pretty decent season this past year. They had 291 goals for, which was 5th in the NHL, which means they were a fantastic offensive team, and Kucherov hitting milestone numbers was a big part of that. But goals against was definitely well below average. I mean, they had 268 goals against, which was 22nd in the NHL. So definitely their defense and their goaltending was just not overly great this year. Their point scoring leaders was players you'd expect. Kucherov led the team with 144 points, was fantastic. Won the trophy for most points in a year. So pretty good pickup there for Kucherov, who had a fantastic season. Brayden Point had a 90-point season, so he looked fantastic, and Steven Stamkos had an 81-point season. After having a shaky, I think, last couple of seasons, Stamkos had a fantastic season, nearly a point per game, and he was great. Goal scorers, same three. Point led the team with 46 goals, Kucherov was second with 44 goals, and Stamkos was third with 40 goals. So usually, I mean, we've talked about a couple of teams over the past couple of season preview series videos where they've had one or two 30-goal scorers. Maybe some teams didn't even have a 30-goal scorer. The Bolts had 3 40-goal scorers. They had a really good offense this past year. The rookie scoring leader was Mitchell Chaffee, who came up in season, wound up putting up 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points, so a decent amount of points there, earned himself a new contract. In the playoffs, their playoff scoring leaders were Victor Hedman and Nikita Kucherov, who both had 7 points in the playoffs, and their goal scoring leaders was Steven Stamkos and Brandon Hagel. Stamkos had 5 goals, Hagel had 3, so interesting stuff there. They did make the playoffs as a wildcard team, wound up losing to the Atlantic Division winning Panthers in 5 games. It wasn't an overly close series, even though the games were pretty close. So that was an interesting note there, but the Bolts for a second straight year bowed out in the first round. It's an interesting season that they had this past year. If you look at their additions and losses from this past season, their additions, they brought back Mitchell Chaffee and Gabriel Fortier, so a couple of decent players they brought back. I think both are RFAs. They also bring in Jesse Alonen on a 1-year deal, Zemgus Girgensons on a 3-year deal, bought out Cam Atkinson on a 1-year deal, and they also bring in Duelier Pouliot and Steven Santini. So a couple of bomb 6 forwards in Alonen, Atkinson, and Girgensons, and some depth defensemen Pouliot and Santini. So a couple of decent additions, but not a whole bunch. Meanwhile, they lost a whole bunch of players. They lost Stamkos, who was their captain and one of their all-time great players, to Nashville. They lost Anthony Duclair to New York Islanders. They lose Tyler Mott to Detroit. They lose Austin Watson as a UFA. They lose Alex Berboulet to Montreal, Dumba to Dallas, DeHaan to Colorado, Fleury to Winnipeg, and Logan Brown as UFA. So they lost a lot of players in free agency this past season. Trades, they made a whole bunch of them. They wound up moving a 2025 second round pick and a 2024 7th round pick, number 213 overall, to Nashville just after they were eliminated in exchange for Ryan McDonagh and 2024 4th round pick, number 128 overall. So they got McDonagh back now. They trade Mikhail Sergachev to Utah in exchange for Connor Geekie, JJ Moser, a 24 7th round pick, number 199 overall, and a 2025 second round pick, which is the Toronto Maple Leafs. So interesting stuff there. They then trade Tanner Jeannot to the LA Kings in exchange for a 2024 4th rounder, number 118 overall, and a 2025 second rounder to the Kings. So that was an interesting trade. And they traded 2025 3rd round pick to Carolina in exchange for the signing rates and eventually signing Jake Guentzel. So that was an interesting move and a smart move there from the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then they also traded Bennett MacArthur to Pittsburgh in exchange for Lucas Svechkovsky. So So some interesting trades there. I think they definitely did a good thing in trying to get back McDonagh. I mean, this team is not overly bad in trying to add some pieces. That they definitely did better defensively with McDonagh. So I can see why they try and acquire him, but then they go and move Sergachev, they move Jeannot, they get Geeky back, they get Moser back, get a couple of draft picks, also get Guentzel. So I think Guentzel's going to do fantastically trying to fill in for Stamkos, but if you look at last year's point total, as much as Guentzel's younger, Stamkos had the better season last year, and Stamkos has been a bigger part of that team. So as much as I think Guentzel's going to be a really good ad, is he really going to produce more than Stamkos, or is he going to be a better player than Stamkos? I highly doubt that. So interesting stuff there, but they also move on from Mikhail Sergachev, which is a big blow. So like I said, they made some interesting moves, but did this team really get a whole bunch better? I can't say so. Their top 3 picks from this past year's draft, they didn't have too many picks. They picked in the 4th round, number 118 overall, took Jan Golic, who's a left shot defenseman. Looks like eventually could be a solid 3rd, maybe 2nd pair defenseman, so a pretty good pick up there. Number 128 overall, which is another 4th round pick. They took Hayden Burroughs, who's a center prospect, so maybe eventually could be a solid 4th, 3rd line center for that team. Could be a really good pick up there. And they took Joona Sirellinen, who's 149th overall, 5th round pick, another center prospect. So they picked some decent players here in the lower end of the draft. Didn't have any picks in the first 3 rounds, which is a little bit disappointing, but still, they made do with what they had, and they made some pretty good additions. So interesting stuff there. I feel like there are 2 biggest questions, in my opinion, for Tampa entering training camp this year. One, it's who plays in the bottom 6. They added a couple decent pieces, like we just said, Atkinson, Ylonen, Girgensons, who I think should round out that bottom 6, but who else could they have? 1 or 2 younger players wind up playing in the bottom 6? I think it's quite possible, so I'll have to wait and see on that, but I think it's going to be really intriguing to see who ends up playing in the bottom 6 for Tampa this year. And 2, will the Guentzel addition be enough? They definitely made a couple of decent moves, but will Guentzel's addition be able to sort of replace the production lost by Stamkos? That's another big question, in my opinion, entering training camp. So in my opinion, the 2 biggest questions entering training camp for the Bolts are 1, who plays in the bottom 6 this year, and 2, will Guentzel be enough of an ad to try and replace the loss of Stamkos? So that'll be interesting to see. Now, if we go over to my projected lineup for this team for this upcoming season, I currently have Jake Guentzel playing on the top line with Brayden Point and Nikita Kucherov. I have Anthony Cirelli centering line 2 with Brandon Hagel and Connor Sheary. Line 3, I have Nick Paul centering Lucas Edmonds and Michael Eyssimont. And line 4, I have Luke Glendening centering Cam Atkinson and Semgias Girgensons. So that's a pretty decent forward group. Defensively, I have Hedman playing with Darren Radish, who are a pretty decent pair towards the tail end of last year. I have Moser playing with Chernak, and I have McDonagh playing with Perbix. So that's a pretty decent defensive core. I have Vasilevsky being the starter, Jonas Johansson once again being the backup, and then I have Chafee and Lilberg being the 2 spares. A 22-man roster that would be cap compliant. So interesting stuff there. If you look at my predictions for this Bolts team for this upcoming season, I don't have them doing too good. I know that they added Guentzel, they added McDonagh, added Moser, added a couple of pieces around the edges, and they did some decent things this offseason. But in my opinion, there were a couple of other teams, especially in that division, even in that conference, got better. And I think there's a very likely chance that with the Bolts, who were hovering just above the playoff line this past year, I think they have enough that they're going to go back. Now, they may not take as big of a step back as I think they will. There's a very likely chance they're going to be really close in the playoff spot, either just make it or just miss. But I have them taking actually a pretty big step back. I have them hitting 78 points this year, just below 500, 20 points lower. I have them being one of the lowest teams in the NHL this year. I actually have them being my underdog favorites of being the worst team in the Atlantic Division this year. So I know it's a little bit of a hot take. I know it's probably not going to happen, but that's my opinion on Tampa right now. I think they definitely did take a little bit of a step back in my opinion, and I have them falling a little bit to 78th overall and lowest in the Atlantic Division. So that's interesting to note there. I feel like 3 ways this team can improve to do a little bit better than last year. 1, they need a defense to bounce back. We just talked about it. Their defense was awful last year. They did miss Sergachev for a decent amount of the time last year. So will the addition of McDonagh and Moser offset the loss of Sergachev? We'll have to wait and see, but it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for. But I think they need their defense to have a bounce back season. Their bottom 6 needs to be stronger. As much as they were a top 5 team in scoring this year, they were led solely on the backs of guys like Point, Stamkos, and Kucherov, and their depth was really lacking this past year, and that showed really much in that first round playoff series against Florida. So they needed their bottom 6 to be a lot stronger this year, and they need a better Vasilevsky. Vasilevsky was average at best last year, came back from injury. He's going to have a little more health this year to start the season, so that could be a really good pickup there for the Bolts if they're able to have a healthy Vasilevsky, but definitely he didn't have his best season last year, and I think there's a very likely chance they need a better Vasilevsky if they wanted to improve this year. So, in my opinion, bounce back defense, a stronger bomb six, and Vasi bouncing back are three ways, in my opinion, I see the Bolts improving this upcoming season. Now, if you look at their season they had this year with their additions, their losses, their trades, their top 3 picks, in my opinion, I'm giving the Bolts a D+ rating. It's not an overly great rating. I think it might even be a little bit lower than what I had them previously, but I think that this team didn't get a whole bunch of it. I mean, they got Guentzel, which is good. They got a guy like McDonagh, which is good. So they add a couple pieces there, add Moser, add some prospects in Geeky and Svechkovsky, add some bomb six for Gina Lonan, Atkinson, Girgensons, get some draft capital, so some interesting things there. But they do lose Sergachev, they lose Janot, they lose Stamkos, Duclair, Mott, Dumba, DeHaan, Fleury. I mean, the list is a very long list, and their depth is definitely taking a beating from last year when their depth wasn't even that great last year. So in my opinion, I'm giving them a D+ rating for this offseason, and definitely, as much as they are still a really competitive team, and it wouldn't surprise me if they wound up making the playoffs, I have them falling drastically, being the worst team in the Atlantic Division. So interesting stuff there. Going over to the Ottawa Senators. Now, if you look at the Ottawa Senators, this past season was not an overly great season for them, finishing with a record of 37, 41, and 4 for 78 points, 7th in the Atlantic, 14th in the East, 26th in the league, so not an overly great season. They had 255 goals for, which is tied for 18th, which is just slightly below average, so a respectable number, but not a whole bunch of really good numbers there on the offensive side. Defensively, atrocious. 281 goals against, 26th in the NHL, so not overly great defensive team this past year. Point score leaders were Brady Tkachuk, who had 74 points, Tim Stützle, who had 70 points, and Drake Batherson, who had 66 points. All were really good players this past year. The goal scoring leaders, Brady Tkachuk had 37 goals, Drake Batherson had 28, and Claude Giroux had 21, so not a whole bunch here who hit over 30, but they did have at least Tkachuk who had over 30, and a couple guys who had over 20, so interesting stuff there for Ottawa. Their rookie scorer leader was Ridley Gregg, who had 13 goals, 13 assists, 26 points. Had a decent season this past year for the Ottawa Senators, so a pretty good pickup there for the Senators, but still, not overly great season from this team, even though they had a couple of bright spots like Gregg, so interesting stuff there. If you look at the team's additions and losses from this past year, their additions, they brought back Matthew Heimer, Cole Reinhardt, Angus Crookshanks, Pinto, Gannett, and Sogard, so some RFAs plus a couple of UFAs that they're bringing back, which is really interesting. They also bring in Noah Gregor, who signed a 1-year deal just over a league minimum, so pretty good pickup there for the Senators to get Gregor. They get Michael Amadio on a 3-year deal at just over $2.5 million. They get David Perron on a 2-year deal at $4 million. They get Am Gaudette and Philip Roos on league minimum deals. Gaudette and Roos are bottom end players, while Gregor, Amadio should be solid bottom 6 forwards, and Perron should help in the middle 6, so some interesting adds there. I mean, all their losses, they did lose a couple of decent players, but not a whole bunch of really significant ones. They lose Dominic Kubalik, who's still a free agent. They lose Yuri Smejkal, who's still a free agent. They lose Ruke Charter, who's in the KHL. They lose Dylan Hetherington, who's still a free agent. They lose Parker Kelly and Eric Brandstrom, both to Colorado, which were decent blows. They lose Boris Tkachuk, who's still a UFA, and they lose Lassie Thompson, who signed overseas. So all in all, not a bad offseason when it comes to additions and subtractions via the free agent market. I mean, Kubalik was never going to be brought back. Smejkal most likely was never going to be brought back. They lose a couple of decent bottom 6 forwards. Brandstrom's probably the biggest one they lost in the free agent market, so interesting stuff there, but they didn't do a whole bunch to really subtract from that team. Meanwhile, if you look at the team's trades, they made a whole bunch of them, 6 in total, so it wasn't include pick for pick swaps. First, they moved Marcus Stelic, Jonas Korpisalo at a $3 million cap hit, and their 2024 first round pick, number 25th overall, which was originally Boston's, back to Boston in exchange for Linus Ullmark. So they added a solid goaltender. Now Ullmark's in the final year of his deal, so there's a very likely chance that maybe he doesn't stay in Ottawa long term, but he's at least going to be there for this upcoming season, which is huge for the Senators. The Sens also then moved Jacob Chychrun to Washington in exchange for Nick Jensen and 2026 third round picks, so it was a small return for them, but Jensen, in my opinion, could be a huge add stylistically to that team. He's a right shot defenseman and more of a defensive defenseman rather than a left side offensive defenseman, which the Senators already have in Shabbat and Sanderson, so interesting stuff there. Then they trade Mathieu Joseph and their 2025 third round pick to the St. Louis Blues in exchange for future consideration, so they trade a third round pick to get out of the Mathieu Joseph contract, so an interesting pickup there for the St. Louis Blues. Then they trade Igor Sokolov to the Utah franchise in exchange for Jan Jenik, a swap of decent AHL forwards who should be spare forwards this upcoming season, so interesting swap there. They then move Robbie Yarvinty and a 2025 fourth round pick to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for Xavier Bourgault and Jake Chiasson. Bourgault should be eventually a solid second, third line center. Chychrun might eventually a solid bottom six forward. Moving on from Jarvin T, who's another young prospect and a 5th round pick, so interesting stuff there. And they also moved Kevin Mendelise and 2026 7th round pick to the Avalanche in exchange for 2026 6th round pick. So they trade up around in order to give Mendelise a fresh start. So interesting stuff there. So some decent trades in my opinion. The Ullmark deal was one I think they definitely won. Chychrun deal was one I think they definitely lost. But stylistically, I think Jensen's a lot better of a fit than Chychrun is. They wound up losing the Joseph deal by having to move on from a 3rd round pick to get off of his contract. And then they make a couple of decent swaps. So interesting trades there for Ottawa. Their top 3 picks in this past year's draft was 1, their own 1st round pick, 7th overall, taking right shot defenseman Carter Yakimchuk, who I think eventually should be a fantastic top 4 right shot defenseman for that team. They also taken the 2nd round, 39th overall left shot defenseman Gabriel Eliasson, who I think eventually should be a solid 3rd, maybe 2nd pair defenseman. And they also take Lucas Elnis. Elnis, who's a center, was taken on 4th round, under 4th overall from the Senators. I think is also going to be another really fantastic fit there for Ottawa long term. So pretty good pickups there for the Senators in the draft, as they had a pretty decent draft, even though they didn't have too much draft capital. Their 2 biggest questions entering training camp, in my opinion, is 1, can North stay healthy? The past 2 seasons, he's had to leave the season at some point due to injuries. Can he stay healthy? If he stays healthy and they have a 1-2-3 punch, Stützle, Norris, and Pinto down the middle, this team should be lethal offensively. But if North gets injured again, they may have some interesting things that they have to work through. So can North stay healthy? That's a big question. Another big question is, can Forsberg have a bounce back season? The Senators wound up keeping Anton Forsberg instead of moving on from him. Wanted to keep him as like the 1B backup to Ullmark. He had a really bad season last year. Can he bounce back and have similar numbers to what he had a couple of seasons ago before he signed his new contract? It's possible, so we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But my 2 biggest questions for the Ottawa Senators is 1, can Norris stay healthy? And 2, can they have a bounce back year from Forsberg? Those are going to be 2 interesting things we have to watch out for. Meanwhile, if you look at the Ottawa Senators for this upcoming season, my projected lineup for this team, as it sits right now, I have Brady Tkachuk playing on the top line with Tim Stützle and Claude Giroux, so that's a decent first line. The second line I have is Drake Batherson playing with Josh Norris and David Perron. Line 3 is Ridley Gregg playing with Shane Pinto and Michael Amadio. And line 4 is Zach McEwen playing with Noah Gregor and Zach Osapchuk. So that's my 4 group there for the Ottawa Senators. My defensive group is Jake Sanderson playing with Zub, Thomas Chabot playing with Nick Jensen, and Tyler Clevin playing with Jacob Bernard-Docker. So that's a really good defensive core in my opinion. I have Ullmark being the starter, Forsberg being the backup, and then I have Jenik, Highmore, and Hamonic being the 3 spares. So interesting lineup there from the Senators, and it would be cap compliant, so interesting stuff there. But I do think that's actually a pretty decent lineup in my opinion for the Senators for this upcoming season. If you look at the Senators, I have them taking a huge step forward. I think Ullmark solves the goaltending problems. I think Jensen's going to help a little bit more defensively. I think they're offensively, they got a little bit better, maybe a tiny bit, not too much, but I definitely do think they got a tiny bit better. And I think all of that will contribute to them making the playoffs this year. I have them being 3rd in the Atlantic Division, narrowly edging out the Boston Bruins. I could see that flip-flopping and them being just a wildcard team, but I have them finishing the season with 96 points for 3rd in the Atlantic Division, 18 points higher than last year, and I have them doing a lot better. I think the Senators are poised for a big step this year. Now, I picked them to be a top 3 team last year in the Atlantic Division. Never happened, so I could see them be a wildcard team. I could see them even fall off a playoff spot. There's a lot of teams in the hunt for a playoff spot right now, but I think with the addition of Ullmark, Jensen is more of a defensive defenseman, and some other things that they did, this team is going to be poised for a big season. So I have them finishing with 96 points, 18 higher than last year, being 3rd in the Atlantic Division right now. The 3 is that they can improve to get better for next year, in my opinion. 1, goaltending needs to be better. We talked about this. Korpisalo and Forsberg were awful last year. There were some decent bright spots, but for the most part, those 2 were awful. So they needed some more better goaltending play, and I think the addition of Ullmark will help them with that. So that's number 1. Number 2, a better start. The past 3-4 seasons, Ottawa's had a crappy start, and it's led to them missing the playoffs. I mean, if they had 500 starts over the past couple of seasons in their first 20 games, they're most likely a playoff team over the past couple of seasons. So I think they need to have a better start this upcoming season. And 2, solid bottom 6. They added some more pieces like Amadio, like Gregor, who can help in the bottom six. I think Ostapchuk's a very likely candidate to get a bottom six role. So in my opinion, I think there's a very likely chance that they need a solid bottom six in order to make this team a little bit more lethal. So in my opinion, the ways this team can improve is better goaltending, which I think they can get with Ullmark, a better start, and they need some more solid bottom six. So interesting stuff there. Now if you look at their offseason adds and subtractions that they made this past year, I think that they warrant a B+ rating. I think the addition of Ullmark's fantastic. Losing Chychrun's not fantastic, but be able to get Jensen, they get Amadio, Gregor, Perron, add some more pieces on the forward group, on the defensive end, some decent prospects like Borgo and Jenik. They also lose a couple of decent bottom six forwards, but I think that was warranted with where they were. So I had them having a B+ rating. So in my opinion, that's sort of warranted percentage. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on the Sens and the Lightning down in the comment section below. What do you think about those two teams? Do you agree with my takes on how they did this past season, how they did in the offseason, and how they could potentially do next year? Do you agree with me? And do you think that the Senators could be a playoff team next year? The Bulls could be a team who winds up missing next year? Is there any other things you think about these two teams? Do you agree with what they've done this offseason, or do you think either team needs to do more? Definitely let me know your thoughts on all that down in the comment section below. That's what I'm going to talk about for today. I'm going to tell you this video. If you'd like to subscribe down below. Thank you for the support and videos with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below. So I'll discuss today's video. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So I'm going to check that out. I'll leave a link in the description below. And I can't see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.